9B notes today. So we're going to start off by using the principles of squares. So when I'm doing this, I have to try to get the squared thing by itself. So I'm going to add 7 to each side. I get 5x squared equals 7. And I'm going to divide each side by 5. So I get x squared equals 7/5. And so my next step is I get to square root each side. So I get x equals, and remember when we're doing the square root, I can do the plus or minus of this. So it's really the plus or minus the square root over 7 over the square root of 5. Now if you remember from Unit 8, we don't want the square root on the bottom of a fraction. So I got to rationalize this. So I got to multiply top and bottom by square root of 5 to rationalize it. And so after rationalizing it, I'm going to get x equals plus or minus the square root of 35 over 5. So now these are the exact solutions. I need exact solutions and approximate to 3 decimals. So plus or minus the square root of 35 over 5 is my exact. Now if I want the decimals, remember on the TI-30XS you have to type the decimal right there. And when I type it in, I should get plus or minus 1.183. Okay, and so now in this question, this is all I really need to do. I get just the positive and negative of the same number. This will not happen very often. A lot of the times you will have to write plus or minus something and come up with 2 answers. So now, this next one, again, it's a good one. We have something being squared on one side of the equation. So I'm just going to square root each side. So I get x plus 5 equals, now square root of 121 is a nice number, it's plus or minus 11. Now to solve for x, I have to subtract the 5 over. So now I get something that looks a little weird. So I get negative 5 plus or minus 11. Now I can do that. There's no imaginary numbers, there's no letters, there's no nothing. So I get 2 answers. One of them is going to be negative 5 plus 11. The other is negative 5 minus 11. Negative 5 plus 11 is 6. Negative 5 minus 11 is negative 16. And both of these work. Because if I look back in the original question, 6 plus 5 is 11. 11 squared is 121. Put my negative 16 in there. Negative 16 plus 5 is negative 11. Negative 11 quantity squared is positive 121. So they both work. All right. So again, we still have 2 more nice ones to do. So from here, I have this perfect square here. So I'm going to square each side. Now back in Unit 7, I would have to say no solution because I can't do the square root of a negative number. But now we know how to do imaginary numbers. So the square root of negative 196, well the square root of 196 is 14. The square root of negative 1 is I. So it's plus or minus 14i. So I have to add 4 to each side. So I get x equals 4 plus or minus 14i. And again, on the computer, there is a plus or minus in the math palette that you can use. So please, you can do that, or you can type out 4 plus 14i, 4 minus 14i. Now, I can't really do this to 3 decimals because it's an imaginary number. Once there's imaginary numbers, you really can't get decimals out of it. Now, this next one, we will be able to get decimals out of it. But I do have to square root each side. So I get x minus 2/5, because the square root of something squared is just itself, equals plus or minus the square root of 4 over the square root of 5. So I'm going to add 2/5 to get it by itself. But then I also should be recognizing I don't want a square root of 5 in the bottom. So again, I need to multiply top and bottom by the square root of 5. So I get plus or minus. Now the square root of 4 is just 2, so it's really 2 root 5 over plain old 5. So now, the denominators are the same, so I could write 2 plus 2 root 5, 2 plus or minus over 5. Okay? Or I could do 2/5 plus 2 root 5 over 5, or 2 minus 2/5 minus 2 root 5 over 5. Sorry, that minus got a little high up there. Move it down there. These two are the same thing and the computer will take it. Now these are the exact answers. Now to get the decimals, remember I have to type in the decimal here for both of those and type it in the calculator. And I get 1.294 for this first answer, or negative 0.494 for the second answer. Again, please verify using your calculator and making sure you know how to type on it. Now, the next question where it gets unfriendly. And the reason being is there's nothing in parentheses being squared, is there? So I need to get something in the parentheses squared, and that's called completing the square. Now, if you remember, back in Unit 6, to be honest, if we had x squared minus 10x plus 25, what I can do is, this is a perfect square. What factors of 25 add up to negative 10? Well, negative 5 and negative 5. So this is really factored x minus 5 squared. So this is what I'm after. And I got to figure out what number to put there to get to so I can complete the square. So now, again, this first one here has no coefficient on the x squared because it has to be 1x squared. This first one here has a 2 there. So what I need to do is I need to divide everything by 2. And when I do that, I come down here and I get the x squared plus 6x minus 15 equals 0. Now, I need to get the x squared and the 6x by itself. So what I do is I add the 15 to each side. And then what I do is I add a blank. I have x squared plus 6x plus blank equals 15 plus blank. Now, to figure out what I'm going to add on both sides, what I need to do is I need to take the middle term 6. I'm going to do 6 divided by 2, and then I'm going to square it. 6 divided by 2, 3 squared. And that's why I put 3 squared there. And then 3 squared is really 9, so I put there. So I'm really adding 9 to each side, aren't I? Now, when I look at this, what factors of 9 add up to positive 6? Well, 3 and 3. So when I factor this, that's where I get x plus 3 squared equals 24. Okay. And this will take several times to do this. And I will also show you a great thing in just a minute or two, and you will really, really like it. It will save a lot of headaches. So from here, x plus 3 squared, again, now this is just like the beginning ones. I have something squared, so I just square root each side. So I get x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 24. Now, again, in Unit 8, you would know right away the square root of 24 is really 4 times 6. So, when I split this up, this is really plus or minus 2 root 6. So I get x plus 3 equals that. Then I got to minus the 3 over here. So I get x equals negative 3 plus 2 root 6, or negative 3 minus 2 root 6. And again, you could have written negative 3 plus or minus 2 root 6 for the exact answer. But they may want the decimals of this. So if they want the decimals of this, I got to type this in the calculator again. Make sure you put the decimals there. I get 1.899, and I get negative 7.899. So those are my two answers. Alrighty, and this one gets a little evilness, and I really dislike the fractions, but it will pop up occasionally. And again, I'm going to show you a nice way to do this. I'm going to complete the square. This is probably going to be the last one I do completing the square completely. That sounds a little silly, completing completely. So now again, we have the 1x squared, so that's good. So that's a first start. So then what I need to do is I need to add the 7 to the other side. So I'm going to have x squared plus 7x, then I'm going to leave a blank, equals 7 plus blank. So now, to find this term I got at each side, I look at the middle term, so that's 7. And here's the painful part about this. I have to take half of it and then square it. So I'm really doing 7 halves squared, and then I'm going to square it on the outside. It's 49 over 4. Now, the reason why I write it like this, just like I wrote it up here, I wrote the 3 squared because the 3, that's what's going to be written inside the parentheses, what's being squared. So this case, it's really x plus 7 halves squared equals, and then I got to let the calculator help me out on this. This is 77 over 4. So now I need to square root each side. So I get x plus 7 halves equals plus or minus the square root of 77. Now the square root of 4 is 2. So that works out pretty nicely. So now I got to subtract 7 halves over. And so if you notice, these have the same denominator, so it's really equal to negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 77 all over 2. Now if they had asked for exact decimals, then I would have to type in the decimal here and work it out. But right now, this is all I'm going to leave it as. Now, this is the way you're going to probably want to solve most of these things here with the quadratic formula. It is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. That is the standard form of a quadratic equation. So whatever is attached to the x squared is the a, and then here's the b, and there's the c. And then we have this formula, and you will have to have that formula memorized. So, in my first question here, x squared, so that means a equals 1, b equals 7, and c equals negative 7. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to put these values into the quadratic formula here. So it's negative b, well b is 7, so that's negative 7, plus or minus the square root, b squared, so that's 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 7, all over 2 times 1. So I get negative 7 plus or minus square root. Now if I type this whole thing under the radicand into the equation, into a calculator, I get 77 all over 2. Now, if this looks familiar, it should look familiar. I'm going to put this in a green box. I'm going to draw an arrow up to here. Oops, it wouldn't let me do there. Up there. That's the same answer, isn't it? And that's a whole lot nicer way of doing it. Okay? You do need to know how to complete the square, and we'll do a little bit more of this, but really when you're solving for these equations, the quadratic formula is a very nice way of doing this. I'm probably going to put a third part to the 9B videos, and I'm just going to prove the quadratic formula. I would definitely do that in class with you guys, so I would like to show you that. Okay. Now, just to practice the quadratic formula here, we got a equals 3, b equals negative 9, and c equals 8. So again, you're just going to have to crank it out, negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And now we just plug it in. So now b is negative 9. That means it's negative negative 9. Now negative negative 9 is really just positive, isn't it? Plus or minus negative 9 squared minus 4 times 3 times 8. All over 2 times 3. So now as I work this further out, I would get negative negative 9 is positive 9 plus or minus square root. And this is just 81 minus 96 over 6 equals 9 plus or minus the square root of negative 15 all over 6. Now, I have a square root with a negative number under it, so I need to make sure I put it in I form, imaginary number. So this is just 9 plus or minus. Now, there's two ways of doing this. I like to write the square root of 15 and then have the I afterwards, and then put it all over 6. Now, it is tempting to reduce the 6 with the 9 and the 15, but the 15 is under the square root, so I cannot do it. Now, if there was a number out front, let's say there was a 3 there, then I could factor a 3 out of both of them and reduce it with the 6. But there is not at the moment, so I cannot do that. And so this would be my exact answer right there. Ugly but true. Okay, now I am going to try to do one of these word problems here. Maybe I'll do the first two and then I'll start doing the rest after in the second part of the video. Because I really like to get between 15 and 20 minutes, and we're right about that time now. So now, we have these, and these two are easier questions. We're given a formula, and we just have to put in the values and find what's missing. So now the height of the building is 1190, and so that's the height in feet there, and it's t in seconds. So now how long? So we're looking for seconds. So that means I got to put 1190 equals 16t squared. So I have to divide each side by 16. And when I do that, I get 74.375 equals t squared. So to solve for t squared, I square root each side. I get 8.624, etc. equals t. Now again, it is plus or minus. But when I'm talking about time, time has to be positive. And so if I have rounded to the nearest cent, it's 8 per nearest tenth, it's 8.6 seconds. Way nicer than the other questions. This next one is similar. They have a few more pieces of information to put in. We have a formula here, and this is truly how you figure out compound interest with this formula. Now, capital A is 2420, so it's going to be 2420 equals. P is 2000, so it's 2000, 1 plus R, and T is the exponent squared. And I want to solve for the rate, so that's the R. So, it's similar to those ones in Unit 8 again. I got to divide each side by 2000. And when I do that, I get 1.21 equals 1 plus R squared. So I'm going to square root each one of these again. And so again, it really is supposed to be plus or minus, but if I'm talking about interest rate, it has to be positive. So this is 1.1 equals 1 plus R. So I subtract 1, I get 0.1 equals R. Now a lot of people will type in 0.1 as the answer. But now remember, interest rate is always in percent. So how do I change a decimal to a percent? Now I got to go way back to Unit 2 and remember. I got to move this over twice, times it by 100, however you want to do, it's 10% interest. All right, so we're about almost 19 minutes, and I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to have another part here. All right, so this ends the first part of 9b.